The asylum issue heads to court. Multiple counties taking legal issue with the receiving migrants from New York City. Hear from an immigration expert on pushing back against those who are calling this situation a crisis. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. A Capital Region town is suing the city of Albany and New York City as several buses of asylum seekers are diverted to their town. It's the latest in the ongoing pushback from upstate against receiving migrants from New York City. The town of Colony filing a lawsuit after declaring a state of emergency to prevent migrants from being housed in the town without a coordinated plan. Area representatives say that city leadership has not been communicating with them. The lawsuit coming after the NYCLU brought a lawsuit against Orange and Rockland counties. They're alleging discrimination against the migrants. Last week, New York Congressman Mark Molinaro on the program describing what he calls a chaotic situation.
And the city is simply outsourcing individuals for a period of time without coordinating with counties, without sharing any of the detail, without communicating with social service staff, without preparing school districts, and without any capacity for those counties to manage the influx of asylum seekers.
Joining us now to speak more on what's being done to support asylum seekers coming here to New York State, Murad Awada. He's the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. Murad, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
For those who've never heard of your coalition, what exactly are you, where are you, and how's it all get funded? Is it nonprofit or government help? How's it work?
Yeah, the New York Immigration Coalition is the oldest and largest immigrant rights organization in the U.S. We are an advocacy and policy organization with over 200 member organizations across the state of New York. We have offices in Buffalo, in Rochester, in Syracuse, in the Capital Region, Hudson Valley, New York City, and Long Island. And we're funded through a mix of, funding streams from government to philanthropy to individuals, as well as corporations.
So do you help people who are here both legally and maybe don't have their paperwork illegally in terms of navigating their way and getting through the system or becoming legal citizens?
Yeah, we help everyone who is in need of help. Our work is really at the intersection of ensuring that everyone who makes it to New York has the ability not just to survive here, but to thrive here. So a lot of our work is around advocacy and policy, but we also have a very strong services department here that actually helps people in communities where they need help the most, from legal services to educational support, to financial literacy, everything in the gamut that people will need. It's kind of like a one-stop shop for all help.
I'm guessing your phone's starting to ring off the hook because of what's happening now with people being bused from the southern border to New York City, and maybe now they'll be going throughout the state. Talk about that right now. They're calling it a crisis. Is that a fair word, what's happening with the migrants coming here?
You know, New York for centuries has welcomed immigrants and refugees. No matter where you look, you see the imprint of immigrants and refugees in our cultural and our social fabric of our lives. New York, for a very long time, has really benefited and continues to benefit from immigrant and refugee communities through their contributions to our local economies as well as to the workforce. No matter where you look, there's been huge contributions, right, from helping staff and be the workforce in a lot of these agricultural jobs to service industry. I think that what we are seeing in this moment is no different than in years prior, right? Migration has always happened with immigrants coming to the state of New York. The only difference in this situation is that people actually need a little bit of help with housing because they don't have a familial or community connection. And over the past year, we've seen an increase of individuals coming to New York City. And that has actually not been as significant as you may be hearing in recent weeks, because Title 42 just was lifted, which was a Trump-era ban at the border, which is a public health policy that didn't allow people to come in. And that was replaced with Title 8 and the transit ban, which in essence, unfortunately, is gutting asylum in the United States at the southern border. So we're not sure why there's this mass hysteria that's being created. We do know that New York as a whole has been a welcoming state and will continue to be a welcoming state for all. And we just need to help people get on their feet. And we're also seeing that folks who are in the New York City shelter system, specifically the adults, are actually leaving once they're able to get a job in the informal economy or in the formal economy and get on their own 2 feet within 30 to 45 days. So, I think that there's a little bit of hysteria that's being manufactured in this moment.
What do you say to the counties who would argue, and some of them are declaring their own emergencies? They say, look, I'm not racist, love immigrants, love migrants. We just can't handle this surge of people coming, and you can fill in the blank of which county it is. We don't have the resources. We didn't ask for this. What's the argument there to them? You must have some sympathy for them, but also, what is your position? You can make some room. You can figure out a way to do this.
We've said since day one that the federal government, the state, and localities need to be coordinating together. And that's where I think in this moment we can do a lot more of is coordination, and making sure that as a statewide effort, we're coordinating not just here in New York City, but we're coordinating across the state. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, immigrants and refugees and migrants have been at times the heartbeat of our local economies, and we know that they are contributing over $60 billion in taxes every year in the state. So for us, it's really making sure that we continue to have our right foot forward and welcoming people, and not using any bigoted or xenophobic rhetoric, because we know that when people are using dangerous and violent language, it ends up turning into dangerous and violent acts.
I know there's a lot of politics involved in all this. People literally run on this issue, one side or the other. Is it possible to get the politics out of it and just deal with the humanitarian crisis of it? Or are they just so woven together, you're kind of stuck with the politics?
I think if we remove the politics and we actually don't think of politics in this moment, right? We actually center humanity. We would to ask ourselves, why would you leave your home if you felt safe, right? People are leaving their homes for a number of variety of reasons, mostly because they feel like their life is in jeopardy. People seeking asylum have the legal right to do so in the United States. People who are coming in have the legal right to do so, based on U.S. law as well as international law. And in this moment, we really need to be centering how do we care for our neighbors and make sure that we're uplifting them in this moment, so that they're able to build their new lives here as they go through the immigration process, and actually get through a very challenging process, right? It's not easy to go through the immigration process in the United States.
Last 20 seconds, if someone watching this wants to support your cause, help you, how do they get involved? How would they reach out to you?
Absolutely. For folks who are interested in supporting the New York Immigration Coalition, please visit our website, www.nyic.org. Learn more about the work we're doing, sign up to volunteer, or donate if you can. Every penny goes very long with a long way here at the NYIC.
Murad Awada, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This year's legislative session is set to end this week. When we come back, we'll speak with Assembly Minority Leader. He'll talk about what passed, what didn't, and what's on the horizon for the next session. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. This year's legislative session is set to end this week on June the 8th. Some lawmakers think it's going to be a late night getting those last bills over the finish line. A number of bills are getting the last-minute push now, including the Clean Slate Act. That bill would automatically seal criminal records for some misdemeanors and felony convictions, excluding sex crimes. Additionally, lawmakers could extend an affordable housing program that gives tax exemptions for new housing. This after the governor's housing plan was not passed this session. Joining us now to take a look back at the legislative session and talk about some of the biggest items, Assembly Minority Leader Will Barclay. Mr. Barclay, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with the obvious question, the legislative session ending in a matter of days. How would you grade how it's been on a scale of A to F? A solid B or somewhere in between?
Well, I would say less than that. I'm a Republican, obviously. It's a very blue state. It's dominated by Democrats. So I'd probably give it maybe a C or C minus. I mean, we passed a $229 billion budget, but we haven't seen a lot of relief. I'm hearing from my constituents things about crime. I'm hearing about affordability. And we're hearing a lot about the migrant crisis, and I haven't seen anything addressed in state government addressing those issues.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that later, but let's get into it now. Did I hear right that about $1 billion of that huge budget was kind of a carve out just to take care of this crisis that they knew might be coming? And I wondered about all those people who lobbied you for weeks and weeks and were shaking signs in the hallways, on the stairs, and out on the lawn outside. Everybody was looking for money. That seems to be a big chunk of money that's going towards this crisis.
Yeah, so the budget did have $1 billion in there to take care of the migrant crisis. Interestingly enough, though, my problem, one, that's a lot of money, of course, and we probably could use for better things. And I think it's probably a federal issue that needs to be dealt with more than a state issue. But putting that aside, one thing we have problems with in Albany is accountability, and there is no accountability on how that $1 billion for the migrant crisis is being spent. So I sponsor a bill along with a number of my colleagues in my conference, sponsor a bill that would require the controller to provide accountability on how that money is being spent. I think that's a good first step, particularly when we're talking a substantial sum of money.
Last fall, going towards the new year, they were calling for special sessions over bail reform. It was such a big issue heading into the holidays last year. Then you guys get into session. There was some bail reform done. Are you happy with what was done, or did it not go far enough?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm happy it was a step in the right direction, but we need to do a lot more. We've always been advocating for common sense changes to bail reform, and one of those changes would be to give judges more discretion when the perpetrator of the crime is a danger to the community. Other states that have instituted bail reform have put that in, for instance, New Jersey, but for some reason there's a real hesitancy in New York State. And we're seeing, unfortunately, the crime rates and it's violent crime rates going up in, not just New York City, but throughout the states. So I point to a number of reasons for that. Certainly bail reform is part of that. Raise the age was part of that. And the whole anti-police narrative has been part of that. So I would like to go back and certainly change the bail laws and change raise the age laws. I think would go a long ways to trying to tackle this crime problem that we're having in New York State.
Kathy Hochul won that seat in a tighter race than many people expected. But I'm curious, dealing with the budget, was it she different to deal with than, say, an Andrew Cuomo, or is it a Dem versus a Republican and it kind of all washes out the same?
No, I would give the governor credit. She seems much more approachable. I had a number of conversations with her over the budget where I had very little communication with the prior governor. So I do appreciate her openness and willing to talk to both sides of the aisle regarding these big issues. Of course, I wasn't thrilled with the final product because I just think we spend way too much money. We haven't tackled our high cost of living in New York State by spending more money. It's just making New York unaffordable, and we're seeing people leave the state. As you're aware, we lost, I think, 400,000 people over the last few years. We can't continue to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. So I wasn't pleased with the budget, but as far as her governing style, it is much more open than the prior governor, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, the running joke is it's good for the U-Haul business being in New York State with people leaving. We got a few days left in the session. Is there anything you want to get done that didn't get done, and does it have a prayer of getting done?
Well, I just go back to criminal reform, criminal justice reform, affordability. I would love to see that addressed. Well, take the gas tax off gas. You're seeing gas prices go up during the summer. But getting those done is probably a tall order for, again, being a Republican in a very heavily Democratic state legislature. That being said, one thing I try to do is not cause more harm. And we do have some ability to stop legislation going through. The one bill that's being pushed and people are talking about getting done by the end of the session is a clean slate bill that would erase people's criminal records. And that may be a fine policy in some circumstances, but it's so expansive what they're proposing. For instance, if you commit murder, potentially you could have that erased from your record. And, I would want to know as an employer, certainly as someone's neighbor, if my neighbor had committed murder. So I think that's a problematic bill, and we're going to do everything we can either to make it better or totally kill the bill.
We only got about a minute left. When you've got an R next to your name, can you get anything done in this state, with it being such a blue state? Our doors open, our eyes open. You say Kathy Hochul is more approachable. Can you get something through, or has it just become, well, Will Barclay, other side, no, whatever the issue is?
No, well, I think it's tough for any legislator, whether Democrat or Republican, get it done just because it's a big state. There's a lot of diverse opinions in the state. But the one thing we have as Republicans is a bully pulpit, and we just keep hammering on some of these issues like crime And we have seen some changes. They don't go as far as we'd like, but bail's been reformed, I think 3 times now because of our pressure on that. It needs to go a lot farther, but at least we do have a voice in it, and we're going to keep using that voice and speak loudly about the issues we feel strongly about.
And last 20 seconds, when you guys sign off at the next week, next few days, you think you're done till next January, or might there be some reason to come back in the fall?
Well, there's always some reasons. There are some things that expire in December that will have to be addressed, but I hope we'll be done next, Thursday or Friday, and then we go home for a while, and then maybe we have to come back for a day or two just to fix some of the things that have to be done before the end of the year.
All right, Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley. Hey, enjoy your summer, and good luck in the final days of the legislative session. Thanks for being with us.
Great.
As the state marijuana industry continues to expand, how is law enforcement working to keep the roads safe? When we come back, we'll be talking to the state police on the challenges they're now facing and the new steps they're taking to keep people from driving while they're high. Hey, if you've got a comment or a story idea, we'd love to hear from you and let us know about it. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out right on Twitter. You'll find us at WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. While the adult use recreational marijuana market continues to expand, the issue of keeping the roads safe and preventing impaired driving falls to state law enforcement and local law enforcement. We're joined now by State Police Sergeant Jonathan Cook to give additional insight into how law enforcement is trying to face this new challenge. Sergeant, thanks for coming on today. How much of a challenge is it now with marijuana versus alcohol? Very different fish, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're very different drugs, and the way that they interact in the body is very different. But the way that we approach trying to prevent impaired drivers from being on the road, whether it's from alcohol, marijuana, or any other drugs, remains pretty much the same.
I would think, though, it's a little tougher with marijuana in that right now you can give somebody a breathalyzer on the side of the road, and you get an answer right away, yes or no, if this person is going to go home or go somewhere else in the back of your car. How tricky is it for law enforcement with marijuana and the impairment there?
That's a great question. It's a question that I hear a lot. I think it's tricky in some ways, but not tricky in that drugs all affect the body and all cause impairment. And the tools that we are trained with, including standardized field sobriety tests and other field sobriety tests that we get through standardized field sobriety test training and A-RIDE training and DRE programs and different things like that, all are geared toward recognizing impairment from any drug, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, or any other drug. So while we do need to look further and maybe use additional tools to assist, I think one of the things that's sometimes a misunderstanding is that a positive alcohol test or a positive drug test is linked to impairment, and it really isn't. We're using field sobriety tests to determine impairment. And then the toxicology, so things like a PBT or a chemical breath test, or a blood draw or different things like that are helping confirm the presence of a drug or alcohol, which support the case. But really to find impairment, we're using those standardized field sobriety tests and other field sobriety tests.
Are we going to have to really push education too? Because I know I'm old enough to remember when people would say, oh, I was a little buzzed, but I could drive. I was safe to drive. I had 2 drinks. I'm okay. It took years to get people to understand buzzed driving is drunk driving. Is it going to be the same way with people with marijuana? Say, oh, I took a couple gummies. I'm fine. It calms me down. I'm fine to drive, though, to get them to understand, no, you're not fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you raise a great point, right? Part of combating impaired driving is the enforcement efforts that we have, and other local agencies also are implementing, often through GPSC funding and national funding. But education is a really big piece as well. I think you can see statistically we do very well statewide with seatbelt enforcement and compliance, as well as alcohol intoxicated driving and compliance. And so increasing education efforts for impaired driving related to cannabis and other drugs is really important. Things like recognizing that even if a drug is prescribed by your doctor or is legal in our state, it can still impair your ability to drive a vehicle. Understanding things like the concentration of THC in marijuana and how it's changed over the last several decades and how it affects your driving, things like that are really important to include in education efforts. So yeah, absolutely, that's a very important component.
And last 20 seconds, your message to people, look, if you want to use it legally, use it at home safely, but don't get behind the wheel.
Absolutely. It's true for alcohol, for cannabis, for prescription medications, for anything that might impair your ability to drive a vehicle safely. If you're legally able to use it, go ahead to use it. You're legally able to drive, go ahead and drive. Just don't do them together, and be safe out there.
All right, Sergeant Jonathan Cook, thank you so much for joining us today. If we don't see you, have yourself a good, safe summer.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Thanks for having me.
You too. Stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. And of course, if you've got a comment or story idea, you got to let us know about it. Email us at news@news10.com. And if you're one of those people who loves Twitter, just go to WTEN. You can message us right there. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, as artificial intelligence continues to capture headlines and attention in the tech sector, multiple lawmakers are now pushing for regulation to this new technology. In fact, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying earlier this month that Congress, quote, must move quickly to regulate artificial intelligence. Next week, we'll speak with an AI expert on the potential for the coming regulations. For now, that's all of us here, right here at Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray in Albany. Hope to see you here next week. Don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations all across the great state of New York.